Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Folks are still being added to the conference, so we'll just give them a few seconds while the technology does its thing, and then we'll get going. All right. Hello, everybody. My name's Stuart Easton from Transparent Choice. I'm one of the founders here. If you've been to our webinars before, welcome back. If this is your first time, welcome. I'm glad you could join us. We're joined today by Carl Manello. I'm going to introduce Carl in a second, but before I do, I just want to kind of set some ground rules for the session. I find these sessions work much better when there's real participation, audience participation. So, down at the bottom of the window, you'll see there's a Q&A and a chat button. What I suggest is you jump on chat right now. Go press the button, do it right now. Introduce yourself, where you're from, and just get involved in the chat. Ask questions, make comments on what you're hearing, and let's all learn from each other. Carl, I think, will be one of the first people to say that he doesn't have a monopoly on wisdom. There's a lot of wisdom out there. So, jump onto the chat. Hey, Vaughan, great to see you. Jump onto the chat and, just join in. So, Carl, over to Carl.
Thank you.
So Carl, welcome. You've been in program management for 30 years odd. But that's not really where you started your career, is it?
It is not.
So a little bird told me that you actually started out in a restaurant.
Indeed. Yeah, my first role was as a busboy in a restaurant that's now defunct. And it was hard, horrible work, but it gave me an introduction to hard work and pay for the first time as a high school student. And it got me involved in restauranting, where I migrated to prep cook and line cook and chef's assistant. So I had a lot of fun with it. But being a busboy was brutal.
Excellent. It's interesting because I started, the first job I had was in retail. I was working in a shop serving people. And I think it's a great grounding to people because it really ingrains that sort of service mentality. You're there to help and serve and to help solve problems, right, in one way or another. So it's a long way from there to where you are today, right? The big shot author, presenter. I think your book's in the second edition. Is that right?
Indeed, it is.
Brilliant. And so people, I don't know if you can see in the background there. There's a picture of the cover of the book. And those levers are in a signal box. Well, in the UK, I don't know if you call it a signal box in the States or not. But on the railways, on the railroads, you got these boxes at the side and these big levers, and you pull them, and it changes the points, and it changes the stop-go signs for the trains, right? So you're controlling the network of trains. Very responsible job. And actually, the picture you've got there is sort of interesting. So my granddad during the Second World War was a signalman, right? So he was working those levers, and there was something like 120 levers in his box.
Wow.
And so he had to know the schedule of every train that was coming and going. He had to know what track it was on, and he had to pull the right levers at the right time to prevent trains from crashing. Just incredible job. So it kind of looks very beautiful and peaceful in your picture, but it wasn't like that. I guess it's all electronic these days. So what made you choose that image?
And we'll actually talk about that in a little bit, but it's along the lines of prioritization for portfolio management. And one of the ways that I have the conversation with my clients and customers is the conversation about, depending on how we change those levers, we'll get a different result, similar to changing the levers and sending the train down a different track. It's really equivalent to setting the weights in a portfolio management tool. Depending on how we set those weights, different things will pop to the top of the lever or pop to the top of the result. So it's very important what levers we choose and then what percentages or weights we assign to those levers.
Excellent. So that's really interesting because you're talking about prioritization and so forth there. And so before this event kicked off, over the last couple of days, we've run a little survey on LinkedIn. Like, these things are not very scientific, but we put out this survey. What does delivery effectiveness mean to you? Because that's what we're going to talk about today is delivery effectiveness, project delivery effectiveness. And so is it about optimizing the delivery process itself, looking at the prioritization of investments, so project prioritization effectively? Is it about resource optimization of project management, kind of the organization? And these four categories kind of map into your book, and I think they map into the slides we're going to use in a minute. But I just thought it was really interesting to show that, at least in this sample, which is probably wildly biased, it's leaning towards delivery optimization, investment optimization. Yeah, because the people that follow us, they're very well educated, right? So they know prioritization is important. So it's probably a biased group, but it was really interesting to see that those two were so heavily weighted. And of course, in reality, it's a little bit of each. You can't just do one of these things; you have to do a bunch of them. So this is kind of a nice little preface for jumping into the talk itself, Carl. I'd love to kind of hand over to you at this point and see what you got to say. But do jump on, folks, and join in the conversation, especially if you have any fun stories about signals and trains.
All right, well, let's jump in. I was explaining to Stuart, my wife and I started antiquing, and we've got a little bit of an infatuation for foo dogs. The job of the foo dog is to stand outside the emperor's palace and guard it. Ours aren't quite this big, but we've probably got a collection now of more than 24 of these scattered around our house. And there's a link in, as we're talking about philosophers and generals today, as I've picked two that we'll talk about from ancient China. And I've leveraged both of their words of wisdom throughout delivery effectiveness. A little bit about me. Stuart gave me a very nice introduction. I've been in consulting for over 30 years. I've been in industry across multiple industries, companies from small private firms to large Fortune 100 firms. I've done some speaking, I've done some writing. I've got a robust experience in the program and project management space, and I think that what helps my clientele is I can bring to them the proven processes for effective delivery from across a number of different industries and find where those apply best. These are the two guys that I'm going to leverage today, and as Stuart said, don't certainly have a monopoly on talent, but I think these two guys are very, very smart and probably undersung. The first one, Sun Tzu, has the book Art of War, which seems to be cited in everything from baking to financial investing. Lao Tzu maybe a little less so, but he's the founder of Taoism, and we're going to bring both of them into our conversation today. The first place I wanted to jump on.
And clearly there's some inspiration there for you professionally and in terms of the beard.
Right, thank you so much. Hopefully I don't look quite as old as that, but I do have a little bit of the extended goatee going on there.
There we go.
So as we look first at Sun Tzu, I'm not going to read the whole slide, but I think his statement I'm going to take off here is: the consummate leader cultivates the moral law and strictly adheres to method and discipline. Thus it is his power to control success. And I think that's where the role of the PMO comes in. A project management organization should own governance. And I know that's a boastful statement because there's many different flavors of project management organizations, not all of which own governance. But for to be true controls and make sure that we have success in delivery of projects, it's my experience that a PMO that owns and monitors and drives the conformance to governance is really important. I think the corollary to that is important to keep in mind is that it can't be specifying every little thing project managers need to do every day, creating a process with 22 checkpoints or a set of templates that are exhaustive and keep our project managers so busy that they don't have time to do the real work. it's important to flexibly apply a rigorous model. That's a little aphorism that I stole from a former colleague when I was in industry, and I've carried with me for the last 20 years. And it's really something to take to heart. Build out processes and governance that seem to address every possible situation, but they're not always going to be applied. I think, Stuart, there's a difference between a construction project and building a rocket ship, buying and developing a shopping mall, or building a software set of tools. They're all projects, but they're going to need different things. And if we have a singular governance model that's not flexible, we're going to find failure. So without that guidance, I think that many organizations are scared of their PMOs. And it'd be interesting if you're able to monitor the chat, Stuart, to see what folks say. I think there's a scaredness in PMOs that companies believe they're going to come in, they're going to be an administrative nightmare, they're going to set up too much red tape, and then the organization will just freeze up.
Well, and it's kind of interesting. There's an interesting kind of combination going on here, Carl, as well, because you've got these ancient characters, right? And we're talking about very modern themes. We're talking about projects, and we're talking about software and things like that. So we ran a webinar a couple of months ago now with a guy called Atif Ansar. So Atif, he's a researcher at the University of Oxford. He runs a business that does kind of predictive governance software effectively for mega projects, for big infrastructure projects. So he actually brought out a quote from between a regional governor and the Emperor of Rome from about 2,000 years ago, thereabouts. And basically the emperor was complaining about the fact that this construction project that was going on in the governor's domain was running late, and it was over budget, and it was, so these problems really have been around for a long time. And so it's really interesting in the last couple of decades where we've got a huge amount of, there's a question coming at the end, right? So we've got a huge amount of people who are certified project managers. We've got, PMBOK, we've got Prince2, we've got all these different methodologies. Right? And, but if you look at project success data over the last decade and a half, it has stubbornly stayed the same, right? It doesn't really matter which metric you use. So what does this tell us about that statistic? Why is it so stubborn?
I'm going to fathom a guess, and you're absolutely right. I mean, all the research points to the fact, especially if you look at the chaos study, we're getting better, but we're still not at a great success rate with projects. I'm going to fathom a guess that at least at this is one point, we've put controls in without thinking about their operational impact. So we get folks like you and I and some of the people on the call who are project management wonks. We love this. We're very academic about it. We're passionate about it, but we may sometimes lose sight to how does this impact day-to-day operational effectiveness. And we set up a dichotomy of the should do and the could do. And because of that, there's a disconnect, and we still have project disconnection and project failures.
Interesting. And the other bit, which I think you're going to come on later on, is if you look at some of the PMI data, they did a really nice piece of research a year or two ago, looking at kind of the top performing PMO organizations and the guys who are not doing so well. Right. So the top performing guys, they deliver on budget, on time, on spec, 90% of the time. The guys who aren't so good, they're around about 30% of the time. So it's a huge difference between those two. And I suspect there's an element of what you just said, but one of the biggest differences between those two groups was the winners, the guys who do it consistently well, have a strong focus on portfolio management, not just project management. So it's not just about the methodology for delivering, it's about this higher level thing that is this sort of portfolio management. And I know you're going to come on to that, so I don't want to.
Absolutely. And just kind of an example here, I've highlighted that I had a client that was a large health insurance company. I worked in their information technology department, and they actually hadn't flexibly applied the rigorous model. Their project management office in IT had set up 140 required project management deliverables that were independent of any product related deliverables, and it became the mire that just cooped up the wheel. The machine wasn't operating because project managers were spending so much time filling out paperwork. Not that they were unimportant deliverables, but they were doing so much time with the project deliverables, they didn't have time to actually operationalize and figure out how to make delivery more effective. All right, should we jump on to our next one, or do we want to?
Let's keep going.
All righty. So number 2, we've got a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Another very famous, often quoted little bit. I'm not sure it's always attributed, but I think it's important for a project management organization to really embody what this means. I have seen project management organizations start up and just start building in a kind of a self-fulfilling way. We're smart, we know what we need to do, and there's a disconnect from their customer base. There's also research that points to the fact that the average PMO dies after 2 years. However, it takes more than 2 years to mature to the next level of effectiveness. So we've got a struggle already that most PMOs don't last long enough to evolve and deliver the next set of value. I think that's because we lack roadmaps. Roadmaps are something that we need to be able to illustrate not only internally to our team, but to our constituents, and make sure that we're aligned on what we're doing, why we're doing it, and the value we're going to get out of it. Where we have PMOs that build for the sake of project management and are disconnected from their constituent base, those are the ones that are more likely to be looked at in a cost-cutting exercise and going, well, we're not getting any value out of that. As a company, let's get rid of them. To establish what that value add is for our customer is really important. So you need a strategy, you need a roadmap. That roadmap really needs to be aligned to the customer or the constituent base, and it needs to be sold. And my example here is an unfortunate one from the company that I worked for, a life insurance company that had an IT project management office. It was suddenly ripped out of IT and put at the enterprise level, which seems like a good thing, but they had no charter. And there were a team of project managers very focused on project management, but the EPMO now really had no roadmap. What the C-suite executives needed was someone to generate a status report on a monthly basis. And that became the most recognized value that came out of this large organization. That's not sustainable to keep a large organization of 20 people employed simply because they create a monthly status report. So there was a disconnect, and then there were people worried about what's the livelihood of their jobs. Is there room for opportunity? Is there room for growth? How can we do better? But management wasn't interested in it. Management was interested in a status report. So there was a disconnect between our leadership in the EPMO and the customer base.
So let me tell a little reporting story, because I think that's really key, right? So just producing reports isn't that valuable, especially in the days of, these days with PPM tools and everything else, they can just spit reports out on demand, right? But I was talking to a bit of an old timer a while ago, and he told me about a particular, I'm not going to name the guy or the company for obvious reasons, because it's going to get kind of messy, but he joined a department. This is 30, 40 years ago. And what the key thing that the PMO, they didn't call them PMOs in the days, but the key thing the PMO was responsible for doing was creating the report. And in those days, the report was printed on, do you remember that paper that would go through the printer, had little perforations down the side, it was this wide, and it was kind of concertina paper, right?
Yes.
So they'd have a stack of concertina paper this big, right? And it was so heavy, they had to put it on a trolley, take the trolley to the elevator, down 3 floors, take it to the executive office, deliver it.
You're dating yourself, Stuart. You're going to tell me this was all created with punch cards too, right?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to touch that one, thank you. But they deliver it to the business stakeholder and go, "Oh, fantastic! My report's here. Thank you. You guys are amazing." Right? That's what they kept hearing was, "You guys are amazing." This new guy came in. He said, "Really? They read that report?" And so what he did was the next month, he just cut the report in half. He just tore it off halfway through, put it on the trolley, took it downstairs, delivered it. And see if anybody noticed. The guy went, "Wow, that's amazing." And nobody noticed. And so the next month, what he did was he took the report, but halfway through it, he put in a little message that says, "Oh, by the way, I'm sleeping with your wife."
Right,
next day he went down and said, how was the report? The report was great. It was really good, right? So nobody was reading this. And eventually he just kept cutting and cutting and cutting. And he got it down to half a page.
Wow.
And that was the half page they needed. And so now that's value, because you're now going from giving people data to giving people insight, right? And so that's just one example of how you can sort of engage your stakeholders and figure it out. So question for you. Who are the stakeholders for the PMO? Who are these stakeholders?
That's an awesome question, and I think every answer is going to be different. I think that's a great answer. As a consultant, I love to say it depends. But is it an enterprise organization? Is it an IT organization? Let's pick the IT organization. That seems to be the most typical. I think the constituent base is going to be widespread. There's certainly the folks in the PMO. They need to know where we're going, why, and how we're going to get there. There's leadership within IT. There's the entire delivery organization, the business analysts, the coders, but there's also the customers or the recipients of the projects that IT delivers. All of those people need to be considered when setting up a roadmap to deliver value. It can't be single-minded. And I've seen that often also where IT PMOs set up what they need for themselves and continue to dismiss their customers. When the question of value comes back in a very heavy organization and an organization with too much expense, we're setting ourselves up for failure. So I'm going to stick with the it depends answer.
Okay, so with that, I'm going to throw out one other little nugget, which is, so when you're having that discussion with these stakeholders, whoever they are, and you say, what do you need from the PMO? If they say, I need this report, or I need that process, or I need this, I would encourage you to use one word again and again and again. Why? Right? Why do you need that report? And when they tell you why they need the report, you say, why? Why is that important? And by the time you've asked it 3 or 4 times, you'll have got to the real problem that they're trying to solve. And the report they ask for may not be what they need to fix that problem. So always make sure you go why, and find out what is it that's the actual nut. What's the nut they're trying to crack, and then figure out what the best nut cracker is to crack that particular nut. But I love your advice here. Build a roadmap and just start walking, right? One step at a time.
Yeah. And if we start that walk without a roadmap, we're not going to know when we get there. And I think that's an important disconnect.
Cool.
All right. We'll move on to our last one. And this is the tying to what you were mentioning before, Stuart, about understanding the portfolio. So this one's a little bit lengthier. Know your enemy and know yourself. In 100 battles, you will never be defeated. I think the corollary is there that it's important that we understand the projects that we're working on, but as people oriented towards effective delivery, we need to understand the whole of the portfolio. And if we divorce those, we're setting ourselves up for delivering something less than success. So very much like Sun Tzu makes sure that we're aware of everything around us. As people charged with delivery, we need to be charged with understanding everything around us. And with all due respect to transparent choice, it's not about the tool. Tools are enablers. We need to make sure that we understand our portfolios and get data out of that. What is key from tools that transparent choice offers is it provides us information. By collecting data and changing levers on our signals, we can get information that enables choices to be made. The tools won't make the choice. It's important that our stakeholders understand the information they're getting, how to process that information, and how to leverage the tools appropriately. And the reason I'm kind of harping on tools is I'm a little bit of a tool bigot because I've seen my customers run out and buy PPM software without thinking about it, without ingratiating it with the customer base, without understanding the impact to process, and not understanding the value of the information they want to get out of it. They consume a lot of time putting data into it and then wondering why it's not delivering value. I think one of the key things for me about my discovery of transparent choice a couple of years ago was Stewart has a methodology that is very similar to something that I stumbled across. And I didn't know it was scientific, and it didn't know that it had a 3-letter acronym. And it was something I did for a cell phone company here in the States. They had over 400 projects to choose from, and they didn't know what to do about that. So at the time, introduced to Stuart, I ended up building an Excel model that had all the levers set out, and we could adjust those levers by setting weights. And we ended up passing out data points to all 400 projects and collecting those in a manual fashion, having some AI run in the background and generate reports. Stuart's now leaped up years ahead, and Transparent Choice can do that all for you. So my model becomes moot. It's still important to understand the portfolio and understand the process of collecting that information.
Yeah, and what it's for. Why are we doing this portfolio?
Exactly.
So I love this page because one of my 13-year-old sons has just rediscovered the game of Risk.
Yes.
And since we played it last and now, in between those two times, he's discovered Sun Tzu. And last weekend we were playing a game. We had two games, and each time he sat there, he had his copy of Sun Tzu in front of him, and he was flicking through, and he was reading it, and then he'd think for a minute, and then he'd make his move, and he'd sit there and go, "Dad, you're going to lose. Dad, you're going to lose." And he absolutely creamed me. He destroyed me. Wow. Both games. And one of the quotes that he read to me was one, different translations say it differently, but I think it was basically this quote, right? Know yourself, and 100 battles you'll never be defeated, and know your enemy, and all that stuff. And that comes down to, why are we doing these projects in the first place? What is it that the organization needs in terms of value? It comes down to what resources do we have to deliver that? So time and again, the most common complaint that we hear, because we're all about that portfolio prioritization selection process. That's what our software does. So the most common complaint that we hear from PMO leaders is, I have too many projects, right? So the executive team is having a big meeting, they're picking the portfolio, and they're just putting too much load on. So that's exactly what this quote is about, right? Because you don't know yourself, you don't know your capacity, you don't know your ability to deliver. So you take on too many battles, and guess what? When you do that, your army's spread too thin, you lose. And so again, we come back to this thing that ancient wisdom is very, very modern, very relevant. And in this case, I think it really is tremendously appropriate to take a Sun Tzu quote and apply it to portfolios. Know yourself, know why are we doing our projects. Know one of the things that I'm going to challenge you a little bit actually around prioritization. It is a little bit about the tools. There are lots of ways of doing it that don't really work very well, and this AHP thing kind of helps, right? It really helps, and specifically, it helps the leadership team get aligned about what is it we're trying to achieve, what's the value we want from the portfolio, and that is know yourself, right? Executive team, know yourself, know what we want.
But I think that's one of the differences that you offer the market, Stuart, is many people run out and buy the tool. They leave it to IT. IT implements it. IT runs it. IT gets the data. IT runs the reports. The difference is you're bringing a tool to bear, but there's a process that goes with that tool, and there's an integration with leaderships saying the tool's not going to do anything if you don't play the game as well. And I think that's what the importance is we need to link those together. If people ran out and bought your tool, but didn't participate, the tool wouldn't do anything for them.
Absolutely right. And similarly with PPM tools, a good PPM tool, well implemented, is a really powerful tool.
Sure.
But a good PPM tool just implemented, as opposed to well implemented, is in fact, it's worse than useless. It's damaging, because you're going to find yourself in that red tape hell. You're going to find yourself, your governance meetings, you're going to be presenting 40 charts to your executive team, and they're not going to understand any of them.
Exactly right.
So know yourself, understand. So again, I love this quote. Understand what it is that you're trying to do before you do it. What's the battle we're trying to win when we implement a PPM tool? What's the battle we're trying to win when we implement project prioritization? Or resource planning, or whatever part of the puzzle you're trying to fix. Make sure you understand why, you've got your stakeholders on board, and then you've got a good chance of implementing it successfully.
Well said.
Same as any other project, really. So, so I think that's pretty much the end. And I have to say the audience has been pretty quiet. Brian's very much looking forward to the day where he can get rid of that red tape. I'd be interested if anybody else has got any thoughts or comments on the talk, any questions, bang them into the chat there. Just make sure that you change it so that it says all panelists and attendees so we can all see your comments. But to Brian's point, Carl, fantasizing about reducing the red tape, it's not going to get you there, right? So how do you start that discussion?
I think it's at least two parts, Stuart. I think the first part is getting the folks who are the masters of everything project management, what I'll call us the wonks, to really stream through what we have and figure out what we believe are the most value added parts of that red tape process, the red tape of too many templates, the red tape of too many sign-offs. Once we've culled that set down to something a little bit more manageable from our professional experience, I think it's going back to our customers and revalidating what's the value you want delivered, and will these tools and processes and sign-offs help you get there? You know, it's very similar to product development. We can go develop a product, but if no one's willing to buy or use that product, it won't sell. If we develop an iPhone that is shaped like a triangle because we know that that's really the best shape for a phone to have, but everyone is expecting it to be candy bar shaped, it's not going to sell. So the disconnect is our inability to constantly go back to our constituent base, our customer base, and validate the value that they're looking for. And I don't want to suggest that we have non-PMO people tell us how to run projects, but it's important to pull them and get their insights and their desires.
Yeah, and to understand the value that they've got. So are there any diagnostics that we can use there? So question for the audience actually is, looking around your own organization, do you think you've got the right amount of, I wonder if we can do this. Let's do this. I think I can do this in real time. I'm going to create a little poll here, and I'm interested in how much red tape do you have? Okay, and our first answer is going to be too much, just right, and by red tape we mean process, and not enough, because it's possible not to have enough process. So I'm going to save that, and then hopefully we can turn that on. I think if I've got that right. Launch polling. There we go. So dive in, everybody. How much red tape do you have? It's a little bit. Oh, we got one brave soul saying not enough. I
have a message that says host and panelists cannot vote.
No, we can't let you vote.
Oh, okay.
You're biased. That's wow. Not right. So while everybody's voting away there, Carl, are there any sort of real telltale signs that you've gone too far on the red tape?
I think the first one is simply quantity. There's a breaking point that's going to be different for every organization where there's just too much. In some organizations, we can have 20, we can have 30 project management tools or deliverables. Maybe that's appropriate. And I don't know what the exact cutoff is, but at that health insurance provider, 140 project management deliverables was clearly too many. When it comes to process steps, I don't know. I boil things down in delivery effectiveness to about 5 or 6 key process steps for the life cycle of a project. I worked at Motorola. Motorola were the kings of Six Sigma in process. Their P-Gate process, I think, had 22 steps to it. So unfortunately, I can run behind the caveat of the consulting answer, and that is it depends.
Excellent. So I hopefully you can see the results there. So it's
upside down bell curve.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? So we've got 40% each for too much and not enough, and we've only got 20% Goldilocks. So we've been focusing on people with too much process. What about people who've got too little? What can you offer them?
I think it would be back to that first kernel of wisdom and making sure that we've established an appropriate level of governance to understand both the projects and the portfolio from kernel 3. Do we have the checkpoints in place? Do we have the approvals in place that are putting controls, probably detective controls as opposed to preventative controls, in place to ensure us that we're going to deliver effectively? If we simply have 3 checkpoints that say, you have permission to start, check in and let us know how you're doing, and then shut down, we lose visibility to how we're doing, and we don't have time to correct. So another metric that an organization could look at is not only volume of things, but currency of information. Do we have up-to-date information about how we're doing? And if we don't, we need to collect either more data or we need to do it more frequently. So every organization is going to be a little bit different. And I know you probably get sick of me hearing that same answer, Stuart, but I've been challenged before that every industry is different. There's rules and regulations for developing drugs, and there's physics that apply to building skyscrapers. So we're going to always have tweaks, but I think if we can look at the outcomes, that will help us understand whether we've got too much or not.
Excellent, brilliant. So we don't have a load of questions from the panel, from the audience rather, but I want to thank you for sharing your thoughts with us today. Thank you everybody for turning up and for happily banging away on the poll and giving us something to talk about there that was kind of interesting. I was quite surprised to see quite so many people with not enough process. So that's interesting. There's obviously still room for people to be improving and deploying more PPM tools and things like that, I guess, at some point. But thank you all for joining, and I hope you found it as interesting as I have. I love talking about ancient history and all that kind of good stuff, so I could probably keep going all night with Carl. But that wouldn't really be fair on everybody else. So thank you all for joining. Carl, thank you for sharing your wisdom.
Thanks for having me. It was great to be here.
And do hop over to our website. We've got a bunch more webinars in the hopper for the next couple of months, and hopefully you will be able to sign up to some of those and join in the conversation again. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for joining.